Sometimes, the greatest emergency is not the one the doctors announce, but the one the heart discovers too late. The shrill sound of a ringing phone shattered the silence inside Daniel Kang's private office just after midnight. Rain streaked across the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, turning thousands of lights into blurred reflections against the glass. Daniel rarely answered unexpected calls himself, but something about the urgency in the caller's trembling voice made him reach for the phone before his assistant could. "Mr. Kong," a frightened nurse whispered, struggling to remain composed. "You need to come to St. Gabriel Medical Center immediately. It is about Miss Olivia Brooks." The line went silent before Daniel could ask another question. 23 minutes later, the black sedan came to a smooth stop beneath the glowing emergency entrance. The automatic doors slid open as cool night air mixed with the sharp scent of disinfectant drifting through the brightly lit lobby. Nurses hurried past with focused expressions. Families sat quietly beneath fluorescent lights, holding cups of untouched coffee while staring toward the intensive care unit. Daniel crossed the polished floor with long, determined strides, his tailored black overcoat still damp from the rain. Every employee recognized him immediately, yet no one dared interrupt his pace. He reached the intensive care unit just as a physician stepped through the secured doors. "Where is Olivia?" Daniel asked, his normally steady voice carrying an unfamiliar urgency. The physician hesitated only briefly before leading him through the silent hallway lined with softly glowing monitors and closed patient rooms. Inside the final room, Daniel stopped without taking another step. Olivia Brooks lay peacefully beneath crisp white blankets, while medical equipment quietly monitored every heartbeat and every breath. Her face appeared unusually pale beneath the gentle hospital lighting. Yet even now she looked remarkably calm, as though she had fallen asleep after another exhausting day spent caring for everyone except herself. Daniel stared through the glass for several long seconds, unable to connect the woman before him with the same quiet housemaid who had greeted every morning with a warm smile and endless patience. He suddenly remembered how many times she had insisted she was simply tired whenever someone asked if she was feeling well. He remembered the moments she paused briefly while climbing the mansion staircase before continuing as though nothing had happened. He remembered seeing untouched lunches left in the kitchen without ever asking why. Every overlooked detail returned at once. The physician spoke gently. She arrived less than an hour ago after collapsing outside the employee residence. She had apparently been hiding a serious medical condition for quite some time. Daniel slowly turned toward him. "Who knew?" The physician lowered his eyes. "That is what we are trying to determine." The hallway became impossibly quiet. Daniel looked once more through the glass before reaching into his pocket and calmly taking out his phone. His expression did not harden with anger. It settled into absolute determination. "This hospital remains exactly as it is," he said evenly after the call connected. "No employee leaves until we understand why Olivia believed she had to face this alone. Preserve every visitor log, every security recording, every medical record authorized for review, and every staff schedule from the past 6 months. Cooperate fully with the hospital administration. This is not about blame. It is about the truth." Around him, conversations stopped. Nurses exchanged uncertain glances. Administrators quietly gathered near the nurses' station. Even the steady rhythm of the intensive care unit seemed to slow beneath the weight of his words. Standing silently beyond the glass, Daniel realized this was never simply about saving one life. Before sunrise, the entire hospital would uncover a story that would forever change the meaning of loyalty, dignity, and quiet sacrifice. The intensive care unit settled into an uneasy silence after Daniel Kang's instructions echoed through the hospital. Outside Olivia Brooks's room, nurses continued their work with calm professionalism, yet everyone sensed that this night would not be forgotten. Daniel remained standing beside the glass, his eyes never leaving the woman who had quietly served his household for nearly 4 years without ever asking for recognition. The attending physician approached once more, holding a neatly organized medical chart. "Mr. Kong," he said gently, "her condition did not begin tonight. Based on the records we have gathered so far, she has been living with this illness for many months." Daniel slowly turned toward him. "Months?" The physician nodded. There were warning signs. Fatigue, episodes of dizziness, weight loss. She visited a community clinic several times, but repeatedly postponed the specialized treatment we recommended. Daniel frowned, struggling to understand. Why would someone ignore medical care? The physician hesitated before answering. Sometimes people believe someone else's needs are more important than their own. Those words lingered in the brightly lit hallway long after the physician walked away. Daniel leaned against the window overlooking the city, remembering dozens of ordinary mornings inside the mansion. Olivia had always arrived before sunrise. Fresh coffee was prepared before anyone requested it. The dining room was immaculate before breakfast. His mother's favorite flowers were always replaced before the previous bouquet had faded. Every room reflected care that seemed effortless, yet he suddenly realized effortless was only what everyone else had assumed. His memories continued unfolding one after another. Olivia quietly carrying heavy laundry baskets while insisting she was fine. Olivia politely declining dinner after long workdays, saying she had already eaten. Olivia pausing for a brief moment on the staircase before smiling again the instant another employee appeared. Daniel had noticed every moment, yet he had never truly seen them. Meanwhile, the hospital administration began reviewing employment records that Daniel had requested permission to examine. An experienced administrator quietly approached him carrying a folder. "There is something unusual," she said. Miss Brooks maintained full attendance for almost 4 years. She never requested extended medical leave. She also declined our recommendation to enroll in the company's supplemental health program, even though she qualified. Daniel accepted the folder, slowly turning each page beneath the fluorescent lights. Every evaluation described Olivia with the same words: dependable, compassionate, humble, exceptional. One handwritten note from the mansion's senior housekeeper caught his attention. "She always helps others before helping herself." Daniel closed the folder, feeling an unfamiliar weight settle across his shoulders. Down the hallway, another nurse quietly approached carrying a sealed envelope that had been found among Olivia's personal belongings when she arrived. "We have not opened it," she explained. "It is addressed simply to if anyone asks why." Daniel looked at the envelope but made no move to touch it. Instead, he asked the nurse to place it in secure custody until the attending physician determined the appropriate time to review it. He was no longer searching for quick answers. He wanted the complete truth. Beyond the glass, the steady rhythm of the heart monitor continued without interruption, filling the room with quiet hope. Daniel realized that power could organize an investigation, preserve records, and bring together the finest medical professionals, but it could never explain why someone as kind as Olivia had carried such a heavy burden alone. Somewhere inside the hospital, hidden among ordinary conversations and overlooked acts of kindness, the answer already existed. Before the first rays of morning reached the windows of the intensive care unit, Daniel knew he would uncover a story that would force him to question everything he believed he understood about the woman who had spent years quietly protecting everyone except herself. As midnight slowly surrendered to the first quiet hours before dawn, the hospital remained awake. Soft footsteps echoed through polished corridors while muted conversations drifted behind nurses' stations. Daniel Kong had not moved far from the intensive care unit. Every few minutes, his eyes returned to the glass doors, searching for even the smallest sign that Olivia Brooks was beginning to recover. Instead, he found himself looking backward, replaying memories that had once seemed ordinary but now carried an entirely different meaning. One of the senior nurses approached with a respectful smile. "Mr. Kong, one of our administrators found additional information connected to Miss Brooks. We thought you should see it." She handed him a thin folder containing visitor logs from a community health clinic. Daniel opened it carefully beneath the bright hallway lights. Olivia's name appeared again and again over the past 8 months. Each appointment ended with the same handwritten note. "Patient declined recommended treatment today. Follow-up requested." He looked up in disbelief. "She came back this many times." The nurse nodded gently. "Yes. She always promised she would return after finishing an important responsibility. She never stopped caring about everyone else first." Daniel closed the folder and quietly thanked her before walking toward a nearby waiting area overlooking the city skyline. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the streets below shining beneath rows of streetlights. As silence settled around him, forgotten moments from the mansion began fitting together like pieces of a puzzle he should have solved long ago. He remembered one winter evening when Olivia carried several boxes of holiday decorations into the ballroom. Halfway across the room, she paused briefly, placing one hand against the wall before taking a slow breath. The moment she noticed Daniel entering, she immediately smiled and continued decorating as though nothing had happened. At the time, he had assumed she was simply tired after a long day. Another memory followed. His late mother had once insisted that Olivia sit beside her during afternoon tea instead of serving from a distance. Daniel had found the scene unusual, but had been too distracted by business calls to ask why his mother seemed so determined to keep Olivia close. Looking back now, he realized Grace Kong had probably noticed every symptom months before anyone else did. A quiet voice interrupted his thoughts. Mrs. Eleanor Hayes, the mansion's longtime head housekeeper, had arrived at the hospital after receiving the overnight call. Her silver hair was neatly tied back, and concern filled her gentle eyes. "Mr. Kong," she said softly, "I have been hoping you would ask the questions you are asking tonight." Daniel looked at her with surprise. "Did you know she was ill?" Mrs. Hayes lowered her eyes. "I knew she was becoming weaker. I asked her many times to take leave. She always answered the same way. She would rest after making sure everyone else was all right." Daniel's expression grew heavier. "Why did she never tell me?" Mrs. Hayes smiled sadly. "Because she respected you. She knew how much responsibility you carried after your mother's passing. She never wanted to become another burden on your shoulders." Those words settled over Daniel with greater weight than anything he had heard all night. Beyond the glass walls of the intensive care unit, Olivia remained peacefully still while dedicated medical professionals continued caring for her with quiet precision. For years, Daniel had believed strength meant carrying every responsibility without hesitation. Now he was beginning to understand that the strongest person he had ever known had never worn an expensive suit, never held a title, and never asked for recognition. She had simply continued giving until there was almost nothing left to give. And before the morning sun reached the hospital windows, Daniel silently promised himself that he would uncover every hidden sacrifice Olivia had made, no matter how painful the truth might become. Morning light slowly filtered through the tall windows of St. Gabriel Medical Center, replacing the cold darkness of night with a pale golden glow that softened the endless rows of polished floors and quiet hallways. Yet the atmosphere remained unusually still. Hospital administrators continued reviewing records while physicians moved carefully from one consultation room to another. Daniel Kong had not left the intensive care unit once. His untouched cup of coffee had long since grown cold on a nearby table, but his attention remained fixed on a single question that refused to leave his mind. Why had Olivia Brooks hidden her illness from everyone who cared about her? Shortly after sunrise, the hospital's chief medical officer, Dr. Michael Carter, approached carrying a secure medical folder and a small tablet computer. His expression reflected the careful professionalism of a physician who understood that some conversations carried far more emotional weight than clinical facts alone. "Mr. Kong," he said quietly, "we have completed a more thorough review of Miss Brooks's medical history, along with records she authorized us to release if she ever became unable to speak for herself." Daniel stood immediately. "Please tell me everything." Dr. Carter nodded and opened the folder. Her diagnosis was confirmed almost 9 months ago. With consistent treatment, her condition could have been managed much earlier. We repeatedly encouraged her to begin therapy immediately. Daniel looked down at the documents. But she never did. The physician gently shook his head. She postponed every major appointment. Daniel frowned. Did she ever explain why? Dr. Carter turned the tablet toward him. She left short written notes after several visits. They were intended only for her medical team. Daniel silently read the first message displayed on the screen. "Please schedule me after the household no longer depends on my daily work." Another appeared beneath it. "I cannot leave while Mr. Kong is handling his mother's estate alone." Then another. "There are employees who need stability right now. My health can wait a little longer." Daniel felt the weight of every sentence settle across his shoulders. None of the notes mentioned fear. None complained about pain. Every one of them focused on someone else. Dr. Carter quietly continued. "There is something else you should know. During nearly every appointment, Miss Brooks asked the same question before discussing her own condition." Daniel looked up. "What question?" The physician smiled sadly. She always asked whether the hospital's employee assistance fund still had enough money to help families who could not afford treatment. On 3 separate occasions, she made anonymous donations instead of paying for additional tests herself. Daniel stared at him in disbelief. Anonymous donations? Dr. Carter nodded. She insisted no one should. No, we honored her request. Silence settled over the consultation room. Through the large glass wall overlooking the hospital garden, volunteers quietly arranged flowers near a small courtyard fountain while visitors gathered beneath shaded benches. Life continued peacefully outside, completely unaware of the quiet sacrifices hidden within these walls. Dr. Carter reached into the folder one final time and removed a sealed white envelope. Across the front, written in Olivia's careful handwriting, were the words, "Please give this to Mr. Daniel Kong only if I cannot explain everything myself." Daniel accepted the envelope slowly, almost afraid to disturb it. For several long moments, he simply looked at her handwriting, realizing that while he had been searching hospital records and security reports for answers, Olivia herself had already prepared the truth. Whatever waited inside that envelope would not simply explain the choices she had made. It would reveal the depth of a kindness so quiet that even those closest to her had never truly seen it until it was almost too late. Daniel Kong remained alone inside the quiet consultation room long after Dr. Michael Carter stepped outside and gently closed the door behind him. Morning sunlight rested across the polished wooden table where the sealed envelope waited in absolute silence. For the first time in many years, Daniel hesitated before opening a letter. He had negotiated impossible business deals, faced relentless pressure, and carried responsibilities that demanded unwavering confidence. Yet his hands moved carefully as he unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. Olivia's handwriting was neat and graceful, every sentence written with the same quiet patience she had shown every day inside the mansion. "Dear Mr. Kong, if you are reading this, it means I was not able to explain everything in person. Please do not be upset with the doctors or with anyone who worked beside me. They encouraged me to receive treatment many times. The choice was always mine. I simply believed there were people who needed me first." Daniel continued reading, his expression growing heavier with every line. "After your mother passed away, I saw how much responsibility you carried. Every day someone asked something of you. Every decision rested on your shoulders. I promised Mrs. Grace Kong that while you rebuilt your life, I would quietly help protect the peace inside your home. I did not want my illness to become another burden for you to carry." Daniel lowered the letter for a brief moment and closed his eyes. He suddenly remembered his mother's gentle voice telling him years earlier that true strength often arrived without making any noise. At the time he had smiled politely, never realizing she had already found that strength in the woman who worked quietly down the hallway. He looked back at the letter. "There is one more truth I have never shared. Every month I used part of my salary to support the Employee Assistance Fund at St. Gabriel Medical Center. Your mother began helping that program several years ago because she believed no hard-working family should have to choose between paying bills and receiving medical care. After she was gone, I wanted her kindness to continue even if no one ever knew." Daniel felt his throat tighten. The anonymous donations Dr. Carter had mentioned were not random acts of generosity. They were the continuation of Grace Kang's compassion, carried forward by someone who had never sought recognition. Olivia's final paragraphs were even simpler. "Please promise me only one thing. Do not allow anyone to blame themselves for my decisions. Instead, if you ever have the opportunity, build a workplace where kindness includes caring for the people who quietly care for everyone else. That would make both your mother and me very happy." Daniel carefully folded the letter exactly as he had found it. Through the consultation room window, he watched hospital employees beginning another ordinary morning, greeting one another with warm smiles while preparing for another day of serving complete strangers. Many of them looked just like Olivia. Reliable, humble, easy to overlook. At that moment, Daniel understood that the greatest sacrifice was not measured by dramatic gestures, but by countless ordinary choices made without expecting gratitude. He stood, placed the letter safely inside his jacket pocket close to his heart, and walked back toward the intensive care unit with a quiet determination unlike anything he had ever felt before. He was no longer searching for an explanation. Olivia had already given him one. Now the responsibility belonged to him to make certain that her quiet promise and his mother's enduring compassion would never again depend on the silent sacrifice of a single unnoticed soul. By late afternoon, the sunlight pouring through the hospital windows had softened into a warm amber glow, casting long reflections across the quiet corridors outside the intensive care unit. The atmosphere no longer carried the uncertainty of the previous night, yet an unmistakable sense of anticipation lingered among the medical staff. Daniel Kong remained close to Olivia Brooks's room, greeting every physician and nurse with sincere gratitude instead of authority. The letter she had written rested safely inside his jacket pocket, and every word continued echoing in his thoughts. Dr. Michael Carter approached with a reassuring smile. "Mr. Kong, I have encouraging news. Her condition is stabilizing. She is responding well to treatment." Daniel released a slow breath he had not realized he had been holding. "Can she hear us?" Dr. Carter nodded gently. "Possibly. Patients sometimes recognize familiar voices before they are ready to open their eyes. Calm conversation can be comforting." Daniel quietly entered the room for the first time since Olivia had been admitted. The steady rhythm of the heart monitor blended with the gentle hum of the ventilation system, creating an atmosphere that felt peaceful rather than frightening. Olivia rested quietly beneath the white blanket, her face carrying the same calm expression she had worn while arranging flowers in the mansion every Sunday morning. Daniel pulled a chair beside her bed and sat down without speaking immediately. For several moments, he simply looked at the woman who had spent years making his house feel like a home while asking almost nothing for herself. Finally, he spoke in a calm voice. "Olivia, I finally understand why my mother trusted you so deeply. She saw your heart, long before I did." His words filled the quiet room without disturbing its peace. "I spent years believing leadership meant solving every visible problem. I never realized the greatest acts of kindness often happen where nobody is looking." He paused, glancing toward the window where afternoon light gently illuminated the room. "I read your letter. I know about the Employee Assistance Fund. I know about every appointment you postponed. I know that you continued carrying my mother's kindness after she was gone." His voice grew softer. "I should have noticed. I should have asked how you were instead of assuming you were always all right." The heart monitor continued its steady rhythm as though quietly answering him. Daniel smiled faintly. "You asked me for one promise. I intend to keep it." Outside the room, Dr. Carter watched respectfully through the glass before stepping away to allow the moment its privacy. Meanwhile, Daniel's executive assistant arrived carrying several folders containing revised company policies that had been prepared after his instructions earlier that morning. Daniel reviewed each page carefully. Comprehensive medical coverage for every household employee. Mandatory annual wellness examinations during paid work hours. Confidential health support without financial penalties. Expanded family assistance benefits. Counseling services available to every member of the staff. He signed every document without hesitation. None of the changes felt like generosity. They felt like responsibility that should have existed long before this day. As evening settled across the city, the first stars appeared beyond the hospital windows. Daniel looked once more toward Olivia and quietly placed her folded letter on the bedside table where she would see it when she awoke. Beside it, he left a handwritten note of his own containing only a single sentence. "Your kindness changed this family long before we understood its value." In that peaceful room, surrounded by quiet machines and gentle light, Daniel realized that true redemption did not begin with grand speeches or dramatic gestures. It began with listening to the quiet truths that had been waiting patiently to be heard all along. The following morning arrived with a quiet sense of hope that seemed to settle naturally over St. Gabriel Medical Center. Warm sunlight streamed through the windows of the intensive care unit, replacing the sterile brightness of the previous night with a gentle glow that reached every corner of the room. Nurses moved with calm confidence, exchanging encouraging smiles as they completed their morning rounds. Daniel Kong had returned before sunrise, carrying nothing except a fresh bouquet of white lilies, the same flowers his late mother had always placed near the front entrance of the mansion every spring. He set the arrangement beside Olivia Brooks's window before quietly taking his seat once again. A few moments later, the steady silence inside the room changed almost imperceptibly. Olivia's fingers moved slightly beneath the blanket, Her breathing remained calm, but her eyelids slowly fluttered open as though she were adjusting to the morning light after a long and peaceful sleep. Dr. Michael Carter stepped forward with a reassuring smile, while the nurses carefully checked the monitors surrounding her bed. "Welcome back, Miss Brooks," he said gently. "You gave us all a reason to worry, but you are doing much better now." Olivia looked around the room with quiet confusion before her eyes finally rested on Daniel. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. She noticed the folded letter on the bedside table and then the handwritten note resting beside it. A faint smile appeared across her face as she understood exactly what had happened. "I am sorry," she whispered softly. Daniel immediately shook his head. "No, Olivia. You do not owe anyone an apology." She lowered her eyes. "I did not want everyone to stop their lives because of me." Daniel leaned forward slightly, his voice steady and warm. "You spent years making sure everyone else's life could continue peacefully. Allow us the chance to care for you now." Tears quietly gathered in Olivia's eyes, but her smile never disappeared. Dr. Carter gave them a respectful nod before leading the nurses outside, allowing the room to become peaceful once again. Daniel reached into his jacket and carefully removed her letter. "I read every word," he said. "My mother was right about you." Olivia looked toward the window where morning light reflected across the glass. She was always kinder than people realized. Daniel smiled gently. She also chose the right person to continue her kindness. For the first time since they had met years earlier, Olivia seemed unsure how to respond. She had always been comfortable standing quietly in the background, allowing others to receive recognition. Hearing sincere appreciation directed toward her felt unfamiliar. Daniel continued. "The new employee health program has already been approved. Every member of the household staff will receive complete medical coverage and paid wellness leave. No one will ever have to choose between caring for themselves and protecting their job again." Olivia looked at him with quiet surprise. "You did all of that?" Daniel shook his head slowly. "No, you did. I only finally listened." The room fell silent once more, but this silence felt completely different from the one that had filled the hospital only a day before. It was no longer shaped by uncertainty or regret. It carried gratitude. Outside the window, visitors walked through the hospital garden while children laughed beside the small fountain, completely unaware that inside one quiet room a simple conversation had already begun changing countless lives. Daniel realized that leadership was never measured by the size of an organization or the influence of a name. It was measured by whether the quietest person in the room felt seen, valued, and protected. Looking at Olivia's peaceful smile, he understood that the promise he had made beside her hospital bed had already begun becoming something far greater than either of them had imagined. 3 weeks later, the grand entrance hall of the Kong estate felt brighter than it had in years. Morning sunlight poured through the tall windows, illuminating polished marble floors and fresh white lilies arranged exactly as Grace Kong had once preferred. Every employee of the household had gathered together, unsure why Daniel Kong had requested that everyone pause their work for a special meeting. Housekeepers, gardeners, drivers, chefs, security staff, and office assistants stood quietly side by side, exchanging curious glances while soft classical music drifted through the spacious room. Olivia Brooks entered slowly through the front doorway beside Dr. Michael Carter, who had insisted on accompanying her for one final follow-up visit before she officially returned to work. She looked healthier now, her smile carrying renewed warmth, though she still moved carefully as she continued recovering. The moment she stepped inside, every conversation stopped. Many employees smiled with relief. Others wiped away quiet tears they had not expected to feel. Olivia looked around with gentle surprise, clearly believing she had returned to another ordinary workday. Instead, Daniel stepped forward from the center of the hall. He was dressed simply, without the formal presence that usually surrounded him during business affairs. In his hands rested a small wooden box that had once belonged to his late mother. He looked toward everyone gathered before speaking in a calm voice that filled the room without effort. "For many years, I believed leadership meant expecting excellence from the people around me. Recently, I learned that true leadership begins by recognizing the quiet excellence that has already been there all along." The room became completely still. Daniel turned toward Olivia. "Mrs. Grace Kong often told me that a home is never built by walls or wealth. It is built by people who choose kindness every single day. He carefully opened the wooden box. Inside rested a silver brooch shaped like a blooming lily, one of his mother's most treasured keepsakes. Before she passed away, my mother told me this belonged to the person who best represented the values she hoped would remain in this family. Daniel gently offered the brooch to Olivia. She immediately stepped back in surprise. "I cannot accept something so precious," she said softly. Daniel smiled. "According to my mother's handwritten instructions, it has always belonged to you. She simply trusted that I would understand why when the right time came." Olivia's eyes filled with tears as she accepted the small keepsake with both hands. Around them, the employees watched in complete silence. Some remembered Grace wearing the brooch during holidays and family celebrations. None of them had imagined it would one day become a symbol of gratitude rather than inheritance. Daniel looked toward the assembled staff once again. "Beginning today, every employee of this household will receive the health protections, paid leave, and family support programs we announced at the hospital. Those policies are permanent. They exist because one remarkable person quietly reminded me that caring for people must never be considered an expense. It is the foundation of everything worth protecting." A wave of gentle applause slowly spread throughout the room. It was not loud or dramatic. It carried the warmth of sincere appreciation shared by people who understood they had just witnessed something deeply meaningful. Olivia looked around at the familiar faces she had served beside for years, realizing that the greatest gift was not the silver brooch resting in her hands. It was seeing every person in that room stand a little taller, knowing they would never again have to hide their struggles in silence. At that moment, the mansion no longer felt like the workplace it had once been. It had finally become the home Grace Kong had always dreamed it could be. 6 months later, the gardens surrounding the Kong estate were alive with the colors of early spring. White lilies, blue hydrangeas, and blooming cherry trees lined the stone pathways, filling the morning air with a quiet sense of renewal. The mansion itself looked unchanged from the outside, yet everyone who stepped through its front doors immediately sensed that something far more important than the architecture had transformed. Warm greetings echoed through the halls each morning. Employees no longer hurried past one another with silent exhaustion. Wellness appointments were scheduled during paid work hours. Family emergencies were met with understanding instead of fear. New staff members often assumed those policies had always existed, but the longtime employees knew exactly where the change had begun. Inside the estate's newly renovated East Wing, a modest gathering was taking place. Hospital representatives from St. Gabriel Medical Center stood beside household employees, community volunteers, and several local families who had benefited from recent medical assistance grants. At the front of the room, a simple bronze plaque rested beneath a soft beam of sunlight. Daniel Kong stepped forward with Olivia Brooks standing beside him. Neither sought the spotlight, yet every eye in the room naturally turned toward them. Daniel looked across the gathering before speaking with the calm confidence that had slowly replaced the distant authority he once carried. "Today we are opening the Grace Care Foundation. Its purpose is simple. No hardworking person should ever have to choose between protecting their health and protecting their livelihood. Compassion should never depend upon silence, and dignity should never be earned through suffering." Quiet applause filled the room before Daniel stepped aside. He turned toward Olivia with a grateful smile. "There is someone else who deserves to speak." Olivia hesitated for only a moment before approaching the podium. She looked at the familiar faces surrounding her, many of whom had stood beside her through ordinary days that now felt extraordinary in hindsight. She gently touched the silver lily brooch resting near her shoulder before speaking. "Mrs. Grace Kong once told me that kindness is most powerful when it continues after we are gone. I never imagined her kindness would one day reach this many people. I only tried to honor the example she gave me." Her voice remained steady, filled not with pride, but with gratitude. "If this foundation helps even one family stay together during a difficult season, then every quiet choice that brought us here was worth making." Several people quietly wiped away tears, including Dr. Michael Carter, who stood near the back of the room with a warm smile. After the ceremony concluded, children laughed as they explored the gardens while volunteers prepared meals for guests beneath white tents. Daniel walked beside Olivia along the familiar stone pathway lined with blooming lilies. They paused before a small memorial. garden dedicated to Grace Kong. Fresh flowers rested beneath a simple engraved bench bearing a single sentence that Grace had often repeated throughout her life. The strongest hearts are the ones that quietly lift others. Daniel looked toward Olivia. My mother believed those words. You live them. Olivia smiled gently. Now all of us have the chance to live them. They stood together in comfortable silence as a light breeze carried flower petals across the garden. Around them, employees greeted one another with genuine warmth. Families shared hopeful conversations, and new beginnings quietly unfolded where unnoticed sacrifices had once been hidden. Power had protected a hospital on one unforgettable night, but compassion had transformed countless lives long after the emergency had passed. And on that beautiful spring morning, everyone present remembered exactly what true dignity looked like.